you for joining us for the next live stream of Rebel One related to impact investing that are moving the industry forward. Today we have two guests, and we have first I'll introduce Marcelo, who is Marcelo de Santis. He is the CIO of Pirelli. He's also on the Hispanic IT Executive Council. He's an advisor at 1871. For those of you that don't know 1871, it's a startup hub in the Chicago area. He's also on the board of the Forbes Technology Council, and he is the board member and one of the founders of Angeles Investors. So thank you, Marcelo, for joining us. We also have Frank Bajal, who I'll introduce you to at Carbajal in a moment, that he is the CEO of Estiempo. So he'll share more about that, founder of Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit. He's also a board member on Silicon Valley Education Foundation and a partner of Angeles Investors. So thank you both for joining us. And I'll dive right in. First, I'm going to ask Marcelo if you can share a little bit more about your background.
Well, thank you, Sergio and Frank, for having me and Angeles Investors this afternoon. Marcelo de Santis. I have to clarify, I'm the former CIO of Pirelli. I don't want to have any problem with my previous company, right? But I am executive advisor for a technology consulting firm called ThoughtWorks. I've been in the industry for more than 20 years, always in technology, as a CIO, as I said before, but now becoming into early stage investing with Angeles Investors. Originally from Argentina, I live in Chicago with my wife, Ana Paula, and my dog, Zero. So if you hear my dog barking, it's because he wants to invest in some cool startups also. So
that's great.
Again, thank you for having me today.
Of course. Yeah, well, I wanted to kick it off with a question. Thank you for sharing more about your background on, we talk about the Angeles Investors Network, and it's fairly new. Can you share what is the Angeles Investor Network?
Absolutely. Angeles Investors is an angel investing group, right? It was born last year after a couple of experiments. And as a result of reflecting that, only 2% of the venture capital funding goes to minority-owned business, right? We look at that, and we also double-click in that number, and I would say a maximum of 1% goes to startups that are owned by Hispanics and Latinx. So we look at the ecosystem. We say, how can we help, right? And on one side, we were looking at, accelerators, universities that were helping Latinx and Hispanic founders to build their businesses and actually, get to what I call a pitch deck, right? From an idea to a pitch deck. But we found that the gap was on people that really helped them to scale those ideas up, going from being a startup to becoming a scale up. And we said our role should be actually to fund those companies, because no one is cutting checks, right? And at the end of the day, that's what makes companies grow. One of the reasons why companies grow. So we said we've built this angel investing group. We set ourselves in the mission to find, fund, and grow the most promising Latinx and Hispanic ventures. So far, we had last year a couple of small pitch nights, and very early in the first quarter of 2020, we became very large suddenly, right? We have now 50 members. We have 4 sponsors and 4 strategic partners. One of them is Frank Carbajal, and with Estiempo, which we have a privilege of having Frank being also one of our advisors. So that's what Angeles is. We are here to help startups to grow. We are here to cut checks, and even in these difficult and challenging times of COVID-19.
Great. Thank you, Marcelo, for the introduction. So, Frank, I wanted to ask you, so we can have a more of an open conversation with the three of us. Can you give us a little bit more color on your background?
Yeah, thank you, and Sergio, thank you for having us on this Tuesday. And I'm here in my backyard, so also if you hear a dog, it's my neighbor's dog. I wish I had a dog, but he would be also interested in investing. So my background is I am from California. My parents, immigrants from Mexico, arrived to the U.S. as migrant farm workers, as I say, are feeding America today. I moved up to the Silicon Valley. Back then in 1973, the Silicon Valley was known as Santa Clara Valley. It didn't have the Facebooks, the Googles, and Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs were working out of their garage at the time. And being in the Silicon Valley, years later, I figured, being the first generation to graduate from college, I noticed not only social injustice, but I wanted to transform that word to social entrepreneurship. So social entrepreneurship is really based on the fact that I had this idea in mind to start writing a book on not only folks in the private sector, but also public sector and nonprofit sector, to bring Latinos throughout the U.S. from humble beginnings to greatness, to create this book, Building the Latino Future. So Building the Latino Future was published in 2008. And unfortunately, that was during a time of a market crash. And as Marcelo and I had discussed before, if we endured hardships in the past, we're going to overcome COVID-19. And so with that, I published the book, and fast forwarding from 2010 until just recently, I had my Silicon Valley Latino leadership set for May 16th, next month, for the 11th annual. And it really is about not only galvanizing leaders together, but really making sure that we're going to accelerate Latino leadership. So the Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit was really born from the platform of my book, Building the Latino Future, Success Stories for the Next Generation.
Great. Thank you for sharing more of that. And
Sure.
In terms of the summit, what can you share a little bit more about what inspired you? I mean, you mentioned the book, but how did it go from I'm writing this book to we're getting the community together? Like how did that transition?
I always enjoy that question because in 2008, when I thought, okay, the book is published, but prior to 2008, I really knew that there was going to be a generation of millennials, and millennials were going to need access to, leadership principles. But, books, in terms of traditional books, a lot of folks weren't going, millennials weren't ordering books or going into Barnes and Noble or order books. So I met with a mentor, and I always believe at whatever age we need mentors. And it's a reciprocal relationship. You also need to mentor and be a mentee. So I thought, I'm going to ask an executive at the time, his name's Dick Gonzalez, what should I do about my book? Because I want to really speed up the momentum, because sales are down. Jeff Bezos was swallowing up all the border books and Barnes and Noble at the time. And he says, Frank, you should really have a live summit where the millennials have access and immediacy to these leaders, these thought leaders, for one day. And I said, well, that's a great idea, but who am I going to have as a speaker? And he's like, I'll be your first speaker. So Dick Gonzalez, at the time being a former executive at Safeway, had leverage, and that leverage really provided me the credibility to approach other folks that were in my book at the time to be my first speakers. And the first leadership summit was on Sand Hill Road, which is the venture capital mecca of the world. And it was kind of like a prototype, right? I was testing the waters, and the first summit sold out for 150 folks that signed in. And there was a person at the time who walked up to me, and he's a dear friend of mine. His name's Michael Lopez. He's like, Frank, let's move your summit to the Stanford Faculty Club. So from the 2nd to the 10th annual anniversary of last year, all summits were at Stanford Faculty Club. Now it's outgrown the Faculty Club. So the 2020 summit will be at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, which is a few blocks away from Google World Headquarters.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And
thank you.
And if you can share a little bit about the summit, some of the past guests that you've had at the summit and some of what you've accomplished.
Sure.
Give the audience a sense.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'll give you a sense. One is a dear friend of mine and Marcelo de Santis. His name's David Olivencia. He was the closing keynote speaker last year at last year's summit. He's the founder of High Tech and a dear friend of mine. And the first summit was a person by the name of Rafael Anchia, a person that a rising star. They said he would be the first U.S. Latino-born president, but back then he said, no, I'm not going to run. I have no interest, Frank. My interest is in venture capital. I feel that I could do more with investing in small startups, but just an amazing, amazing speaker. Folks like Henry Cisneros have been honored. Saul Trujillo has been honored. Aida Alvarez, who is one of my mentors and a pioneer. She worked under the President Bill Clinton Small Business Administration. She was an SBA at that time. And Dr. Jerry Porras, who is one of the founding members of LBAN, the scaling program at Stanford. And it's interesting, an interesting story about that is he was the first lifetime awardee at the Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit. And I remember the following year, we're having a dinner, a private dinner. I'm sitting next to him and he says, Frank, your summit has really inspired me. And I've been thinking about creating something here at Stanford. I said, really, what is it? He's like, just attending your leadership summit, maybe a scaling program. And sure enough, 2 years thereafter, LBAN was born. And I feel very humbled and moved by the fact that folks that have attended the summit have left inspired and know that they have what it takes to create either a startup or build coalitions within our community.
Got it. And for people watching, Marcelo, before I go back to you, can you share, if they don't know what LBAN is, the Latino Business and Action Network, can you share a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, it really is about companies, startups that are in revenue making more than $1 million a year. And it's a scaling program. So if, a company, a small startup really needs mentoring along the way, then LBAN is the place to be because it has various cohorts per year. And in fact, their cohort is starting on May 16th, the day that I was going to have my leadership summit, but their cohort is of course virtual with under this pandemic. So they have a lot of mentors in place that really could not only guide a startup along the way, but making sure that they're scaling that startup.
Great.
And scaling up.
So a great program for entrepreneurs, Latino entrepreneurs that are $1 million plus and trying to make it larger. Marcelo.
Lastly, I'd like to really acknowledge the person that's the CEO there, Mark Madrid, who should be one of your guests in the future, as well as Victor Arias, who's a mentor of mine, a great person.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you for asking.
I will. So Marcelo, thank you for that, Frank. And Marcelo, if you can share a little bit about how did you meet Frank, and how are you working together to move Angeles investors, that network forward?
Well, I met Frank actually was during the last summit, his summit, Silicon Valley Latino Summit. And it was the first one for me. And I have to tell you, I mean, you shouldn't miss the summit. I mean, first of all, let me tell you something. You shouldn't miss the summit because it's not only the content and the speakers, but the experience you have connecting with people is unique. It's like a family. I tell you, it was my first time, my first 5 minutes. I was feeling like I've been part of that community for 10 years, right? So Frank has the ability to create an experience that is unique and bringing people together in a way that I think is second to none. So thank you, Frank, for inviting me that first time. And to your question, since I met Frank during the summit, one of the things I remember we were during the cocktail, and I didn't know how to help Frank because I have also at that moment I had this still the passion of helping the Latinx and Hispanic community. And I don't know if Frank will remember this, but I told him, you know, Frank, I I don't know what you need help for, but I will put my time on helping you in anything, right? Because I was so excited about the experience and the people I was meeting that I said I want to be part of this somehow, right? Contributing. So we met the first time during the summit, and then when I started to put together with other colleagues this idea of Angeles investors, which by the way, at the beginning started as an incubator, right? And you know, we pivot the idea into an angel group because we saw that there were many incubators. Actually, the one that Frank mentioned, LBAN, led by Mark Madrid, I think is one of the best experiences for entrepreneurs that we have in the whole country. I mean, no doubt. And I agree with Frank, you should meet Mark because he's a wonderful person, great leader, and he's doing great things for entrepreneurs in the US. So we pivot into this angel group. And as we are putting together this angel group with people like David Olivencia, also Adela Cepeda, who is a very well-known Latina in the finance community, I was thinking, how come we don't have Frank as part of this team, right? So I called Frank one day and I say, hey, Frank, look, we're building our advisory board and we need help because, you know, lifting up an angel group is not easy. Believe me, it's not easy because you need to build it and then sustain that momentum for a long time because you're investing and maybe expecting the return in 5-6 years from now, best case scenario, right? So I connected with Frank. I shared with him our mission. I knew Frank was going to like the mission because he's all about helping our community. I had that feeling before the call, and I have to say after the call, the feeling was true. He said, how do we work together? So Frank is a member of our advisory board, along with Samara Hernandez, who is founder of a venture capital firm called Chingona Ventures, right? It's a very interesting name. And you know, he's helping us basically bringing ideas, how to scale up Angeles. Obviously, the network that Frank has in the West Coast is unique. And you know, we're meeting next week with Frank and the board to brainstorm of what things can we do during 2020. And you know, that's what we do. I think we became, you know, friends during the summit, and now we're working together in Angeles. So I'm looking forward to continue the partnership and the friendship with Frank.
Yeah, and if you could share a little bit more also about right now, the members, are they only in the Chicago community or are they national?
They're national. Angeles Investors is a national angel group. We have members from New York, from the West Coast, from Florida, from many different parts of the US. I would say that if not the majority are in Chicago, right? I would say they are outside Chicago, most of them. And we want to keep it that way, right? We want to keep it that way. Maybe in the future, if this grows, we might get into Latin America and Spain. But you know, step by step, we want first to build this strongly within the US and then see what happens.
And in terms of so you have a national network of angels focused on Latin American community, and are there any particular, like, it's open to everyone, but how is it structured? Is it open to everyone, but you focus on investing in Latinx founders, or is it focused on Latinx investors and it's you invest in all founders? How do you how do you scope your focus?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, we have a selection criteria for companies, and one of the criteria that we use to select companies to be part of our pitch nights, our events, is that the founder is Latinx or Hispanic, or the team members are Latinx or Hispanics, and or there is a board member that is Latinx or Hispanics, right? Now, if we have a startup, right, that doesn't apply to any of those characteristics, we will look at them, right? Absolutely. But we always provide priority to those, I would say, Latinx, Hispanic DNA ventures, right? So that's one of the main, selection criteria points that we have.
Great. And if you could share a little bit more, I know you guys have just started, and can you talk a little bit about what you've done to date? Like, how are you all making investments together, or are you doing them are individually? You connect the investors and the startups, and they take it themselves. Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said before, we have conducted 3 pitch nights. The first 2 were a little bit like an experiment. The last one in Chicago was, large, right? 40 members attending, and I think 10 or 15 through Zoom. So far, we have invested in 5 companies, a total investment of almost $500,000, right? Part of the investments have been individuals, right? Each of the angels were connecting with the founders. Few investments were through SPVs, right, as a group. So we have those 2 options. We do not invest using SPVs if we don't get to a minimum of $150,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a lot of, I would say, cost in setting up an SPV. Less than that might not be the most efficient way of doing it. But we do both, right? We
Mm-hmm.
let investors to do it individually whenever it makes sense, or in some cases, when we go above 150,000, we do it as a group.
Got it. And so I could see I'll bring Frank in as well, so we can chat about this, but more openly. It's like the implicit rationale of highlighting underrepresented investors because they're getting such a small amount of venture capital. Can Frank, I don't know if you want to share your thoughts on what do you feel needs to change in order to get more capital to underrepresented founders. Not I would say not only Latinx, but Black, Latino, women founders that have historically gotten haven't received the same proportion of capital as their counterparts.
That's an excellent question. I think one of the things that Marcelo and David know in terms of my background and here in the Silicon Valley is the fact that I think bigger sponsors really need to pay attention to smaller businesses, whether the entrepreneurs of a team of 2 to a team of 50, and looking at, for an example, Google Ventures, for example. Google Ventures is an accelerator that really helps the communities that are made up of really bright engineers. But at the same time, I believe, in terms of my experience here in the Silicon Valley, the Latinx community has been overlooked. And we have very bright, not only entrepreneurs, but engineers and having what it takes to make that business go. And so we really need buy-in from larger corporations. And my call with Marcelo and David next week, we're going to brainstorm on some of those ideas. And I think one of the things that also has to be paid attention to are the fact that some of these small business entrepreneurs are being discouraged from approaching angel investors or VC firms, and they're being encouraged to apply as a 501c3. And there's nothing wrong with nonprofits, but it takes away from the whole mission of that entrepreneur that has that drive and that spirit. So I think Marcelo also will touch on the mentorship piece that that myself and the founder of Chingonas come in as, you know, mentors, advisors, to really connect those dots. So that's an excellent question.
And can you also share both a little bit more on the advantages that some of these founders that are outside of, let's say, the New York and San Francisco ecosystems, or come from underrepresented backgrounds have? I know I've had conversations with Frank, who's also on the line. Frank Denbo, that he's an entrepreneur himself and works at Microsoft, talks about cultural, the cultural competency that these underrepresented founders come with, and that insight and the value of that. So if you could, Kate, do you guys have certain examples of that that you've seen in working with founders?
Well, I could let me just give you an experience of a cultural experience and cultural differences. Last week, I was part of this competition, and this competition had to do with an international speech contest. And the demographics and the makeup are really folks from made up of East India and folks of Chinese descent, where culturally I was really blown away that I was the runner-up. So I believe in transparency and leadership. So I asked candidly, how did I not take the top spot when I'm talking about, you know, COVID-19, the pandemic, and how Latinos are feeding America? And one woman who's from Israel, she commented and said, well, yours was very passionate, but the other person who won was more creative. And see, so cultural shifts, I think, are misunderstood in our community. And Marcelo and I had this discussion. We need to incorporate passion into strategic thinking when it comes to business. And there are cultural worlds apart, if you will, that we need to, as Latinos, galvanize and strengthen the strategic thinking when we're ready to pitch, because it really takes a matter of 1 minute for a person to make a judgment. But at the same time, that's why Angeles Group exists, is because we understand one another, but we really have to elevate that entrepreneurial drive, not only drive, but make sure that that business is going to be invested in.
Yeah, and I know it's usually used in other contexts, but the concept of code switching and being able to convey that in certain communities, depending on your audience. You might speak differently to an audience of, you know, Black, Latino, or women investors as you would a general audience. And it's not good or bad or wrong. It's just catering toward the audience, like
that's exactly it.
And that concept. Marcelo, do you want to comment? You have a...
Yeah, I just want to build what, you know, Frank said. I mean, one of the reasons we built Angeles is because we wanted, you know, to have investors that are Latinos, right? They look at companies that are owned by Latinos and Latinas. So that's very important, because we understand that kind of, you know, interaction, right? And we understand people, and that is very important, specifically at early stage, in where you typically, yes, you know, someone can come with a great idea, but the quality of the team is a great ingredient that will make a company a success, right, in the future. So if you have the ability to understand the quality of a team and, you know, the leadership in that team, you already have a great capability in that angel investing group to at least, you know, make a sound decision on where to invest. The other thing is, our angel investor group is not only to help the startups, but also to encourage Hispanics and Latinx to become investors. it is interesting when, when I'm talking to potential members, some of them are already investing, right? I mean, many of them, but some of them are interested in joining Angeles because they say, you know what, Marcelo, Frank, I haven't invested in the past and I want to do it. So what a better opportunity I have that joining a team in where I feel comfortable being part of a team. I learn from people that is like me, right? And I build a capability that I today I don't have. And remember, we need more entrepreneurs that are Hispanics and Latinx, but we also need more investors that are Hispanics and Latinx. So we're building both sides of the equation, plus hopefully, with the mentorship program that we are going to be building with Frank, with, startups growing in our portfolio, why not our members become board members of those startups? So if you look at the whole proposition is we are trying to build the whole ecosystem, right? Investing, growing the companies, growing mentors, growing board members. And if we build all of those at the same time, I tell you, I think the impact will be pretty large.
Great. No, and if either of you can comment also is we're gonna have in we've reached out to the groups of All Raise and Black VC, blck.vc as well, talking about how they're building their community. Are there any plans or have you started working with the other underrepresented groups that are focusing on these issues as well?
We started, yes. We have plans to connect with many of them in the next couple of months. We have a list of all the VCs that are working with underrepresented groups, and we believe in allyship, right? Which means I'm here for you. You hopefully at one point, you help me whenever we need. But we want to offer help to help each other, to actually raise our voices together.
Can you share, either of you, any of the unique challenges that you're seeing now for the community in the light of COVID-19?
Well, I think overall, I mean, it doesn't matter if you are a minority or not, investing is being challenged, right? I mean, I share with you a very recent statistic that came from PitchBook that was looking at, VCs and angel groups and asking them, how much would you be willing to invest in 2020? And it's interesting, right? Because you might be expecting extremely bad news, right? So I'm gonna share. I'm a numbers person, right? So 60% of the responses were, well, I might be extremely cautious about investing, between cautious and maybe not investing at all, but 40% saying this is the best possible time to invest, right? Yeah. Because during this crisis, you see many companies, I always remember the case of Spotify was born during a crisis, right? And what a great company is today. So I think that's a challenge and an opportunity. And for us in Angeles, we said, we want to take it as an opportunity. We are open for business. We still do the pitch night virtually, obviously, but we still do the pitch night. We have more than 25 startups going through a pre-selection process for the end of May. And we do believe that in any crisis, there is an opportunity. And obviously, we are adapting our process to look for the right opportunities, right? I mean, obviously, our due diligence process is a little bit more strict in certain aspects, right? Business fundamentals have to be very solid, right? Cash position, the quality of your revenue, your receivables. I mean, we don't want to see companies that are distracted trying to survive, right? Mm-hmm. And they cannot actually scale up their businesses. We might also look at specific industries that are more resilient to COVID-19, things like healthcare or remote working or any software productivity tools or platforms. And last but not least, we don't look at all kinds of business models. We always, even before COVID-19, we were focused on tech at the core companies, right? Platform businesses that, in our opinion, are more resilient because they're built on top of software which can actually pivot one way or the other as consumers or customers' expectations change. So that's what I see as challenges. And that's also how we are reacting to those challenges from the Angeles Investors Group.
Got it. Great. So you're going to have 25 startups pitch for those watching on May 29th for the Angeles Investors Group virtually.
We are pre-selecting from the 20,
Okay.
from the 25. We're going to have between 3 and 4. We typically select the 4 possible best. The ones that we do not select, let me clarify this, because people say, what do you do with the other people, right? Well, we call them alumni.
Yep.
Right? And we have been helping them, right? Many of the companies that didn't get to the pitch night in the first quarter, we're helping them. One of them, we're offering them our mentors, right? I mean, contacts, for, growing their business. And if they continue to grow, they might come back in a quarter, 2 quarters, or next year with a better business model, better business proposition, and we will look at them, right? So we never leave anyone outside the family. Once you are in the family, you stay with the family.
Got it. Great. That's a great background in supporting the entrepreneurs. Frank, if you want to share a little bit more, you mentioned in the beginning about the Leadership Summit. I know this year, in light, it was supposed to happen in May, and in light of the current situation, everything's gone virtual. Can you share more about what you plan to do in light of this challenge?
Yeah, so I mentioned in the beginning of my call, well, before we got on, that my wife, she works in public health policy team. So I really get inside news before it even is released in terms of things that make me aware of our situation and pandemic. So back in March, before shelter in place, I went ahead and contacted the Computer History Museum, and I postponed the summit right away. And hopefully, crossing fingers, it's set for August 22nd. And for example, it's here in the Silicon Valley, but if there's not travel ban, but if there are folks who are afraid to jump on a flight and come over to California, when we could at that point, then I'll still, and if they allow me to have the summit, I'm still going to have it on August 22nd. But yeah, I had mentioned that I really want to continue the momentum. So what I'm having next Friday, beginning April 24th, is Es Tiempo with Frank. And it is a dialogue. It's a conversation with leaders that are speakers for the summit and sponsors or awardees. So from April 24th throughout the summer up till August 22nd, with the momentum, I will have once a week Fridays with Es Tiempo with Frank.
Okay.
For discussion.
That's great. So every week you'll have a different speaker and shed light on how we can better get through this time with COVID-19.
Yes, and the first one will be April 24th with a woman by the name of Irene Chavez, and the topic will be mentoring during this crisis, because there are a lot of folks who are millennials or in the future with Generation Z that really need to hear the advice of an expert. And Irene Chavez is an executive at Kaiser Permanente, so she really comes with not only a spirit of mentoring, but a wise person that could help the Generation Z and millennials get through this time.
Great. And I just wanted to wanted to leave some time for both of you before we end up closing. Do you have any words? Remember, most of the people are watching. They're either on the founder side, right, or they're current or aspiring investors. So if you were to leave a word for them in terms of like your opinion of focusing on innovation at this time, what would you say? So Marcelo, I could start with you.
I would say if you're thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, right? First of all, get ready for uphill battle in the months to come, right? It's always uphill for entrepreneurs, but it's a little bit more difficult. Now, don't get discouraged, because in any crisis there is an opportunity, and I know people listening to us. I'm sure they have great ideas, and they will find a market in where they can put their ideas to work. So do not get discouraged. There is tons of funding going around. That money is not the problem. But you need to make sure that you have a great business proposition and you have a customer that wants to pay for it. I would say if you are an entrepreneur already, if you are in a startup, I would just say two things, right? First, secure your business fundamentals, right? Cash flow position, get those receivables fixed, right? Get that money back into the bank. And if you can, get a line of credit, right? I mean, before you need it, right? You want to negotiate that as soon as possible. And on the revenue side, stay close to your customers. I mean, you might have some customers that might say, I want to think a little bit more about contracting your product or service, but stay close to the customers you have, right? Make them feel that you're close in these difficult times, because that will pay back. When this is over, they will remember you being with them, and they will honor that commitment that you have during difficult times.
Great. And Frank?
I would add that this is a time to build relationships with individuals that are investors. And if you're an entrepreneur, don't give up hope. And what I mean by building a relationship is having virtual chats with that person that could listen, not only listen to your idea, but provide input that, as Marcelo mentioned, there's money, but the money is just on pause right now. So you can't be discouraged. You have to keep pushing through. And for example, if one person during this hardship is seeking a loan or things of that nature, please have them send you a message. And I do have contacts for that. I don't want to mention it right now because, of course, I'm a person that is of resource, but I'd like to reach out to that individual first and say, hey, I was on a call with Sergio, and there's an individual that is interested in a loan. And if that's the case, then I would be happy to make introductions. As Marcelo says, that's a very good point, because we can't, let this crisis right now hold us back and let us just be isolated in one room and not think there's hope. There is hope, and continue that hope, because we will get through this. And we just have to take one day at a time and really understand that day at a time is to write a short list of 5 individuals that you feel comfortable with enough to reach out via direct message and say, could I have just maybe a half an hour of your time?
Great. Well, thank you, Frank. Frank Carbajal and Marcelo de Santis. Thank you both for joining us, and thank you for the work you're doing in elevating Latinx founders and underrepresented communities. We'll have more. For those that either joined in the middle or missed part of it, you can go to Rebel One Live to view the whole interview. And there's also a link if you want to sign up for the May 29th pitch night, Angeles Investors. It's angelesinvestors.com, but you can also find it in the link. Thank you again, and join us this coming Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll be interviewing our next set of speakers in the Founder and Investor series. We'll be going global at this point. Daniel Evans, he's the CEO of Forward Accelerator in the United Kingdom, and we also have Ashley Nowicki, that is an investor in emerging markets from Quinoa Capital. So thank you everyone for watching, and this was Rebel One.